Hello and welcome to the Warehouse Podcast, part of the Believe Podcast Network. My name is Tyler, and today we are talking about some breaking news from the Baltimore Orioles and their front office. I've got a headline from the New York Times and The Athletic here that says the Orioles plan to expand their front office and hire new GM under Mike Elias. I think we all, generally refer to Mike Elias as the team's GM, the general manager, and that is part of his title, but his full title has been Executive Vice President of Baseball Operations and General Manager. And apparently, what happened is secretly last offseason, the Orioles promoted Elias to Executive President or President of Baseball Operations, kept him as the General Manager. And it seems that this coming offseason, he will be removing that General Manager title and giving it to someone else. I think the order of the events actually happening isn't too surprising. When Elias came on board, the Orioles were a struggling team. The Buck Showalter and Dan Duquette era of the team, while great when it was at its peak, had flamed out. The minor league system was devoid of a lot of talent, and the team was losing a lot of games at the major league level, and it was just really ugly all around. Elias came in, made some clear changes that we saw a couple of seasons of losing, but in general, I think the rebuild was relatively fast. I know at the time I would have preferred to see a little bit better quality of talent at the major league level. When it felt like the Orioles weren't really even trying to put a contender on the not a contender, but a competent product on the field. They were really just focused on the lower levels of the organization. But regardless, Mike Elias played the game as it should be, built the team back up. And prior to this season, they'd gone to the playoffs back-to-back seasons. They'd won the American League East, and they were poised to make another run this season. It has not panned out, but I think you could say coming off of those two seasons of successes, the way he'd rebuilt the farm system, rebuilt the organization really from top to bottom, and obviously had meshed fairly well in the first year with a new owner. Dave Rubenstein seems to have liked him, and they've gotten along well. And I think based on the winning and the interpersonal connections, Elias was handed I would imagine, an extension and an increase in salary, increase in title this past offseason. I think that makes sense. What doesn't make a lot of sense is the lack of publicly acknowledging that fact. Um, I know Elias himself has spoken a lot about how it's not his place to talk about the contracts of personnel. Player contracts are one thing; those are pretty publicly known. Maybe not the finer details, the fine print, but the years and the money is well known. The same is not true for coaches, for managers, for front office personnel. And it seems Elias has taken that, to the extent of his own situation, which, I think that's fine in terms of compensation and years left on a contract. But it's odd that the fact that his title changed and yet the Orioles publicly and even on their website, he is still listed as the executive vice president and general manager under the baseball operations portion of the Orioles website. It's odd that that wasn't changed at all. So I don't know, some weirdness there. Does that really matter? I don't know. I think the timing of it is interesting. Obviously, the Orioles have struggled this year. They've been better since the Brandon Hyde firing. Are those two things connected? I don't know. The Orioles won a lot of games with Brandon Hyde the last 2 years. The team clearly was struggling badly on the pitching side early in the season, had some injury stuff that certainly didn't help matters. But the fact is that since the Brandon Hyde firing, the Orioles are basically a 500 team, and they've continued to battle injuries. They just got Kyle Bradish back. They just got Tyler Wells back. Felix Bautista's been out now for a month. Jordan Westbrook's been out a while. Adley Rutschman's missed time on two different occasions, two IL stints. I think all those things together, you could say Elias, in terms of the talent he accumulated, the work he did behind the scenes to build this roster, he essentially succeeded in building what should have been an 85 to 90 win team. They're probably going to end up around 75 wins or so, and you lose those 10 to 15 wins from a dramatic outcome in injuries and bad luck. And, I you can understand that argument. And I would say that I'm definitely on the side of the fence that says Mike Elias should be the guy calling the shots this offseason. I think the Orioles they don't seem to be a systemic failure. They are just the product of some of those things I just laid out. And I'm perfectly fine with him being the head of baseball ops going into this offseason, which he already was. He already was the highest ranking member of the baseball operations staff. Just a change of title, which, like I said, is likely coming with, an increase in compensation and probably a longer term contract, I would imagine. Um, but the timing of it being at the end of the season potentially just answers questions that you don't want Elias answering, in his end of year presser or something like that. You don't want him to, have to be like, well, yeah, I don't know. We'll have the conversation internally about 2026, yada, yada, yada. Instead, this comes out. It makes it pretty clear that he's going to be the baseball head going into this offseason. And in fact, he's going to even get a little bit of help in that role. Now, why didn't they give him help prior to this season? I don't know. Did he maybe think he could handle it? Did they maybe not have their ducks in a row? Did they not have good enough candidates? Maybe they already kind of operating that way. Maybe Sig Mejdal is kind of operating as the GM, Elias as the president of baseball ops. I don't know. And they brought in the scouting director from the Nationals. Because I don't even know if I read this whole thing. So I've recorded this a couple times. I've had a couple interruptions. So I pardon me if this is duplicative. But the story from The Athletic reads, the Baltimore Orioles doubled down on the leadership of Mike Elias before their disappointing season even began, quietly promoting him to president of baseball operations, sources told The Athletic. The promotion of Elias occurred last offseason. The Orioles now plan to build out their front office, including the hiring of a general manager who will work under Elias. The expansion of the team's baseball operations group began last week when the Orioles hired Washington Nationals scouting director Danny Haas as a special assistant to the general manager. So will Haas be getting the bump up to GM, or will Mejdal get the bump to GM? It's not clear. Mejdal has been a candidate for GM numerous times around the league now, and it hasn't happened. I don't know if it's a preference from him to not have that type of a job, or maybe I'm sure it's more of a commitment time wise. It might not be something he's interested in. I don't know, or just hasn't found the right fit. Again, I'm not sure the answer to that question, but that's kind of the long and the short of it in terms of what happened here. I will say, just because Elias is going to be is promoted to president of baseball ops and will no longer be the GM, they'll hand that title of GM to somebody else. Doesn't mean that he's not going to be the one like calling the shots at the end of the day. He's the guy putting the team together. I think if you look at the Cubs, they have a similar setup where Jed Hoyer is their president of baseball operations, and then Carter Hawkins is their general manager. Now, I don't know a lot about the Cubs, but I know when you think about the Cubs front office, you think of Jed Hoyer. You don't think of Carter Hawkins. At least I don't personally. Jed Hoyer is still very much the face of the front office of the Chicago Cubs. I would imagine Mike Elias is still going to be the face of the Baltimore Orioles front office, but now he can potentially, you know, have distribute responsibilities to somebody else. He can groom somebody to take over certain jobs, and then that person potentially becomes an attractive option around the league for other GM jobs or ever other baseball operations jobs or things like that. That does happen. I think, again, going back to the Orioles, Dan Duquette was this executive vice president of baseball ops for the Orioles for a long time. There was that one point where the Toronto Blue Jays wanted to make him president of baseball ops. He would have gone to the Toronto Blue Jays and still been the quote unquote GM. I think we just use that term sort of loosely. GM is like the front of the front office. But it is a specific job that I guess, I couldn't tell you exactly what it deals with. I would imagine it deals more with like specific player moves, maybe, the waiver wire, putting in claims, some more paperwork, some things that maybe Elias at this point in his career doesn't want to do anymore. He wants to handle more of the big picture stuff. And you can understand that, I guess, from a day-to-day interest perspective. But regardless, I think mostly what this move is sending a message to everybody. Look, Elias is the dude. He is going to be calling the shots going into 2026. You don't have to ask that question because he's already got it, and we're focused on 2026. I think Rubenstein and the Orioles pretty much made that clear with the Basayo signing a couple weeks ago. It'd be odd to sign a guy to an extension, have your GM out there, have the owner out there, and then a month later fire the GM. It'd be an odd setup. So I don't know if this was really a question anymore at this point, but this certainly does solidify things. I think it also probably indicates there might be some tweaks coming to the approach. I think this already started um, earlier this year when, the Orioles fired Hyde, Mancelino takes over. They've had some shifts in the coaching staff a little bit, but nothing major. I think they're just going to tweak their perspective a little bit on things. They're bringing this guy in from the Nationals to help them with scouting. That might change the perspective a little bit. Um, And I think it's just more tweaks than anything else. The overarching theory of the case with the Baltimore Orioles, I don't expect to change a lot going into this offseason. Um, Mike Elias has his way of doing business. We should talk about what that is. It's opportunistic approaches and I think pragmatic approaches. He knows pitchers break down once they break down all the time, but it doesn't make a lot of sense financially and, you know, pound for pound, dollar for dollar to invest a whole lot in a 31-year-old pitcher who might be talented and has some good things about him, but has likely already pitched their best baseball. You don't need to give that guy $25 million a year, $30 million a year because he's probably going to break down. You can get similar production from either a 35-year-old that's looking for a 1 year deal or taking a chance on a 26-year-old that hasn't really broken through yet. I expect that to be the theory of the case with Elias still. I don't expect the Orioles to go big fish hunting, big game hunting in the free agent market for a starting pitcher or a reliever for that matter. So I would imagine the rotation is likely going to be either, Bradish and Rogers is a good start. Kramer, as long as he's healthy with that forearm, is a nice fifth starter. I think in between that, you might make a trade for somebody interesting that has a year plus. I mean, obviously gonna have a year, maybe 2 years or more remaining under team control. I could see them doing that, a trade. I don't expect them to make any big signings though. So Dylan Cease, although he's hasn't been as good this year, I don't expect him to be an Oriole next year because he's going to get multiple year offers, and I don't expect the Orioles to swim in those waters on the starting side of things. Same in the bullpen. I think the Orioles believe in their way of building out a bullpen, which is sort of finding and rebuilding arms and making things work. Now, the closer role is a unique one. I think you do sometimes need a unique type of person for that job. My perspective has always been that the closer doesn't necessarily need to pitch in the ninth inning. I think your closer can be like your best pitcher that comes in at the moment that feels like it seals the game. So that could be the eighth inning, that could be the seventh inning, whatever. I could see them going and getting a guy on a 1 year deal there. We discussed those options in a previous podcast, so go back and listen to that. But again, that's more the Craig Kimbrell type of deal from 2 years ago, well, a year and a half ago at this point, where they signed him to a 1 year deal, I think with a club option or maybe with a mutual option. I can't remember. Um, and was really good for half a season. Probably should have been an all-star in 2024 and then fell apart in the second half. I could see the Orioles doing that again, but not big money there. The other thing I would love to see is more contract extensions for young players, but again, it takes two to tango on that. I think we've talked about that as well with the Basayo contract. So go back and listen to that episode. But I think all this it's mostly just weird timing and weird the way the Orioles have acted about it throughout the year, just kind of publicly being like, yeah, Mike Elias, the executive vice president of general manager. But that's not what his job has been the whole time. He's been the president of baseball ops the whole time. Just Orioles weirdness, man. Just weird stuff that the Orioles do, but in general, probably not a big deal. Mostly just a place setting for the off season to avoid awkward questions for Elias, to give him a sense of public backing that is going to allow him to at least get to next year with one less thing to worry about. But again, if the Orioles struggle again next year, second year in a row, there's going to be some questions asked. So this is still a massive offseason for Mike Elias because again, this doesn't change much. I think we were all thinking for a while, Elias is the guy going into 2026. But if they stink again next year, there's going to be some serious questions asked. Does getting a GM underneath him really help that? No, I don't think that eases that public perception at all because Elias is going to be the front facing guy for the organization still. What it helps more is probably day to day. He can give a couple of duties off to this other person, and that's great. And if that helps the Orioles win and achieve more, that's fantastic. But I don't think it really impacts a fan's perception of what's going on, minute to minute in the front office. This is Mike Elias's deal, and the Orioles are going to sink or swim based on the decisions that he makes, not that, this GM that comes in and is, playing second fiddle to him is going to make. So not a huge deal, just odd from the Orioles perspective. So I don't know. Let me know what you all think in the comments of YouTube, on Spotify, or email us, thewarehousepod@gmail.com. You can also reach out on Blue Sky. We're at the Warehouse Pod over there as well. Let us know what you think of this. Is this a big deal? Does this mean Mike Elias is the GM for the next decade with the Orioles? Is it a big nothing burger that is pretty much just to save face at a time in the season where the Orioles are going to have an end of season press conference? They're going to talk to season ticket holders at the end of the year like they always do. Um, does this just stave off some of those awkward questions? So yeah, let me know what you think over there. Again, we are part of the Believe Podcast Network. So head over to believe.com. That's BLEAV.com to check out our show as well as others. And please subscribe and rate and review the show as positive as possible. It really helps us reach other people, and we would really appreciate it. But that is all I've got for this quick episode on some breaking news about Mike Elias becoming the president of baseball operations for the Baltimore Orioles. Hope you enjoyed, and we will talk to you next time. See ya.